Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? I'd like to put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw him with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man. None of it is true.
Anointed!
This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion.
Welcome back to the Deep Share podcast, and it's been a while since we've done an episode not related to the Rise of the Experts series, so we're going to take a little break from, classic American conspiracy history, and we're going to do something that's been a long time coming, I think. Mario Garza is here with us, and it's been a long time. What's up, Mario? How's it going, man?
Oh, things are well, dude. And speaking of your Rise of the Experts series, I just have to say that got me to sign up for your Patreon. And so you guys are doing good work. I like what you're just up to these days. I like just where your head is at with everything. So right now, the Deep Share is, absolutely one of my favorite channels, to be completely real with you.
That's humbling, and I appreciate that a lot. I really appreciate that, man. And your channel, Symbolic Studies, everyone who has not been there and checked it out, you need to go check it out as soon as possible. We had a conversation like 2 years ago. I think it's been that long at this point, with Ben Balderson and Dan Unaki Dan, and we kind of connected Saga with a lot of the work that you were doing, and we were kind of trying to triangulate some ideas. It was kind of a mess and all over the place. And as we were talking about before we hit record tonight, it's kind of like an open study situation, and it is again here. And we also have our friend Dustin Wilson with us. Dustin, how's it going, man? Nice to have you back.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Hell yeah, dude. And I always like to say that Dustin is a wordsmith. He's very good with language, and he knows the saga, or he has retained it and can deliver it really well, in my opinion. Amongst us Westerners, amongst us Americans, you're from who I know, you're one of the best. So it's good to have you here, and I think it'll be good to hear what we can come up with tonight. But for the most part, I've never had Mario on just to hear about his work directly and what he's up to, and so I want to hear what's been going on in your world lately and what your work has brought you towards lately, man.
Yeah, for sure. So if people are unfamiliar with my work or my channel, I started off by exploring a lot of symbolism having to do with the zodiac, right? And so I felt like if I was going to be a kind of serious symbologist, that I would have a good understanding of the zodiac and what that's all about. And so for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been producing content around the zodiac, generally following each sign during the sign itself. So right now I'm putting out content related to Pisces, right? And so I did that for a number of years. And along the way, I always felt like there was more to astrology. There was more to the zodiac and all of that. And so kind of in tandem with that, I got really interested in the North Star. And from there, I went down so many different rabbit holes with the North Star and what I refer to as polar symbolism or northern symbolism. And I realized that what I was really tracking was kind of the what some people refer to as the primordial tradition or the northern tradition, the polar tradition, that this is perhaps the earliest tradition that we can actually track. And people had a reverence for both the northern portion of the sky, I would say, and then also the northern portion of Earth. And so there's a correspondence there, right, with the North Pole and the pole star, the North Star. And so this really just got me so excited, and I felt like there was just a lot of information there that I needed to get into and digest and see how it relates to other things that I had been learning. And I was realizing that within astrology, I felt like it was kind of limiting me in a way, that there was more than just these 12 signs that you can look into. And what I realized, where I'm kind of at these days, I'm realizing, and I've known this for a while, but there was a great switch from the polar age to a solar age. And there's something to be said about an intermediary sort of age that's lunar based, But probably for the purposes of this conversation, I'm just going to talk about these two great ages. And so the polar reverence to more of a solar reverence. So I think that there was polar deities, polar mythology that kind of got solarized over time, I would say. And one of the things I've been getting into recently is the idea that literally there are authors that I've been reading, and there's examples out there where people have said that their research has led them to an understanding that even the original sky clock was literally more northern. And a lot of times people refer to Ursa Major and Minor as being kind of the original sky clock in the northern sky, right? But even I was reading a book by this guy named John Major Jenkins, and he was saying that the Chinese zodiac, his understanding is that what he says, I'm very hesitant to give out dates personally. And you guys, yours awareness of history is much greater than mine, I would say. I really come at things from a symbolic lens. That's almost how I choose to learn history. But he was saying around 5,000 years ago, around the creation of the I Ching, that in ancient China, they had 8 constellations around the North Star. Each constellation corresponded with a different trigram, right? This belongs to the I Ching system, which is made up of 64 hexagrams. And that over time, these 8 constellations representing the 8 trigrams got shifted over to the ecliptic. They got shifted over to the zodiac, so the path of the sun, right? And then they added 4 more constellations. So now there's 12 constellations. So this guy is saying that there is a polar origin to the zodiac, which is a solar-based system because you're tracking the path of the sun. So it seems to me in so many different ways that this polar tradition, having to do with the North, is essentially kind of a blueprint for a lot of other symbolism that came after it. And so the deeper I get into my symbolic awareness and what the meaning is behind, say, the tree or the mountain or the stone, it seems like there's always this northern kind of correspondence there. So I just feel like this is my sort of calling right now to get as much out there as I possibly can, to understand it as best as I can. It relates to a sort of spiritual sort of framework as well, which has a lot to do with the center, including your center. And so there's some excellent authors that I've been reading lately. Rene Guénon is one of them, who talks about this beautifully. And he has a complete understanding, in my opinion, of the primordial tradition better than anyone that I've read symbolically. And so it seems as though humanity did have an Arctic origin story. And this sort of Arctic origin, which obviously you guys know, the North Pole was once referred to as, paradise and Eden and things like that. That location, that sort of sacred center on Earth, where a lot of people believe that they came from, this is the blueprint for a lot of different traditions and a lot of different myths out there. And it's actually a blueprint for all pilgrimage locations and all pilgrimage sites, essentially. So when people say that, they live at the center of the world, or that the center of the world is in their backyard, or it's in their country, or something like that, this is kind of mirroring the original center, essentially. That's what I found. And so whether you're talking about Mecca or you're talking about Jerusalem and a bunch of other locations, if you have a sacred holy site, this is basically, just a what Guénon refers to it as, it's a secondary principle to the original principle. So this is a secondary sort of sacred center location. And the original, though, was at the North Pole. And obviously, you guys can see how this weaves into, the Bock Saga stuff. So whenever I've heard you guys talk about the saga, my sort of like brain just like, lights up, and all of these new connections are being made. And I see a lot of similarities, with what I'm looking into. And so, yeah, so that's kind of just like a general sort of idea. There's all sorts of different tangents, though, with all of this stuff. I went down a huge Lovecraftian rabbit hole. There's multiple books about Lovecraft basically embedding the Northern Polar tradition in his work. There's an excellent book called Polaria by W.H. Mueller. He wrote all about that, even literally The Gates of the Necronomicon by Simon. You know, you could see right here on the cover, that's Ursa Major right there. So
Oh
um,
wow.
to me personally, I think polar wisdom is the wisdom of the ages, you know, and in today's world, most people are going to give credit to the sun for a lot of things, which obviously the sun is glorious and radiant and beautiful. But I get into unpacking some esoteric solar symbolism. I did that in my last presentation called The Rising Sun. Go ahead.
Excellent. Yeah, Dustin, come on in.
Yeah, I was I see this often in the Bock Saga where you know, I've been trying to think about this distinction of when you're talking about something or you are the something, right? So if I'm talking about you, Andy or Mario, I'd be talking about you, but I can't speak as you. And it seems like what you're finding is that even in Bock Saga, they don't talk about gods or mythological people or anything like that. They do have a lot of symbols. And so I think this is why, because it's through the use of symbols to encode an entire saga within, you know, you have the name for the symbol, right? And things like that. And so especially, and there's an interesting thing that most people don't understand about the Bock Saga or don't know, is that actually that it is not just the axis that the Earth spins around, but the Earth's axis is directly connected to the North Star in the saga. According to the saga, that is a galactic axis, not the Earth's axis. There is no actual pole in Earth. It's a galactic axis that goes through it. And I
So
thought
we're
that
kind
was
of
interesting.
talking like an
And
energetic sort of situation, like a energy field.
yeah, so well, we have the first Ragnarok. So as Mario was saying, there was it seems like we have the shift of polar symbolism to solar symbolism, right? Because but in the Bock Saga, we're at an upright axis, and so the actual location of the North Pole is where the sky clock came into the brain of the first person, you know, or one of the first people, right? And it's that alphabet wheel. I'm not going to be able to pull it up. I don't know, but the letter U is for it is Ursprung, and that's origin. And the first syllable there, the UR, the that in root language that means clock, like the face of a clock.
Excellent.
And, yes, and so this is one. The origin is saying the origin is sprung, and sprung would be like spring, like you spring into action or springtime or but in paradise we didn't have seasons. So what happens now, we have this tilt and we're dealing with how important the sun is. Actually, it's important to pay attention where it's at, because now we have seasons. And if you don't plant the crops in Taurus, when the sun rises in Taurus, you don't plant the seeds at that time of year, you're not going to have anything to harvest in the season of harvest in Virgo, when the virgins would come out and harvest the crops. So astrology, which is also another root language word, which is the os true logi, the Osser's true logic, right? And this is the logic they created because, you know, how it, you know, according to the Bock Saga, all of the animals from the sheep or from the goat, we got the sheep, the pig, and the cow are coming from the goat that were domesticated in the Arctic, and these are the symbols that are found in the zodiac.
Is this? Am I sharing the right? Am I sharing the right image for you, Dustin?
Yeah. That, I mean, that's the alphabet wheel.
Right.
That one's like a nice digital version, so it's like clean.
We got
right.
But
and actually, I would love to comment on this wheel too.
Please.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, so I've been a graphic designer for 20 years. And so I've had a lot of experience playing with shapes and images and icons and colors and all that kind of stuff. And so one of the things that has really sort of spoken to me about the polar tradition And this idea of a center, a sacred center, is that basic shapes have a center to it, right? So it seems to me like the shift has moved from the outer portion of the wheel, which is obviously significant, right? And so when you're dealing with the wheel and wheel symbolism, the external part is what actually meets the road, right? Or the ground, but the center of the wheel is extraordinarily significant, and that is the hub of the wheel. So this is the axis. So the heavens have been referred to as a heavenly wheel.
Well,
right?
hey Mario, check this out. In the center of that wheel, see that red line going up, and then there's a dot. That is representing the galactic axis to the North Star.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
if you look at it like a 3D image, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And so when you see wheel symbolism, this axis, right, of the wheel, it's referred to as the world axis. So if people want to do more research, they can look into the world axis or the axis mundi. And so this is kind of a fundamental symbol, unbeknownst to me. And so I didn't realize when you look into a lot of modern symbolism books, a lot of books do not make a reference to the world axis. And the books that do make a reference to the world axis, essentially what they're saying is that so many of our important symbols go back to that. So Andy, I heard you mention the lance, right? The other day in regards to this. So the lance, the pole, the tower, the obelisk, the tree. The idea behind the world axis is that it connects all of the realms above and below. And I think you're seeing this encoded in the magician card as well. The number 1 card, even the number 1 itself is a reference to this world axis, essentially. And so this center is the galactic center. So it's the same center, absolutely. And so the center to our galaxy, in my opinion, I think it's much closer than what people realize. And I think that part of the sort of solarized heliocentric sort of world we live in, it's pushed this idea of the center further and further and further and further away. People back in the day had more of an understanding that their sacred center, once again, was actually close to them. It was actually in their backyard. It was much closer to home. And so now I think that I don't know. I just think that this idea of the center is in large part lost. And even Ganon, this author that I'm reading right now, he basically said that during the golden age, this center was known, it was understood, it was revered, it was protected. And now that we live in, basically kind of a fallen age, a dark age, it's the center, it's this world axis that is missing. That's why we live in this dark age, essentially.
Yeah, so I have something to add to that with Bock Saga, because one of the things that Bock Saga just kind of puts out there is all the references to the male pole and the female hole, right? Yeah. And this is mysteriously missing from the zodiac. We have domestication, we have agriculture, we have this kind of symbolism built in. But what's the story? What about Aquarius, right? What about anyway? So there's a story being told in the stars, but it's also, when we're talking about all these symbols, we see pole, but in today's society, it's so taboo to be talking about the man's lance. Yeah. And this is something that Bock Saga is very blatant, and it's kind of shocking to hear at first. It's very shocking. And and it's just interesting how, even I'm, shy bringing it up, because anyway,
you go to that part of the world, and a sauna experience is quite different than what you're going to get at the YMCA here in the West, Right. So it's a whole worldview, when you, like in Scandinavia, and like you go there, and I mean, I've never been there, but I've obviously seen a lot about it. And the culture is there's so much of normal everyday culture that is reminiscent of older heathen times, right? That would automatically terrify any Christian that got anywhere near there. And it's just normal. Their version, like their old folklore, that's just how it's translated, it's just so different. Like think about the word hell, and we talk about it all the time as it meaning home or completion, and that is probably one of the most offensive parts of the saga when talking to like devout Christians. They're like, how, what? It's a total inversion, right? You know, so it's really back to the talking about the man's lance. It's absolutely, it's like the Western world. We've been we've been infantilized where we're not allowed to acknowledge or have reverence for the act that gets us all here to begin with. And that's
Exactly.
always irked me. But then again, of course, you look around at the modern world that we live in, and it does seem like there's a perverse and almost hijacked or confiscated version of that older, sought after golden age, where we were all comfortable with our bodies and everything. It seems to be coming back, right? Terrence McKenna had his great archaic revival. I think it's literally on this shelf if it's not downstairs. But the archaic revival, whether he helped out with this or not, seems to have been hijacked because we are not getting a pure version of this older world. That's kind of what I'm seeing.
For
And
sure,
anyone
for
can
sure.
jump in. Open study, right?
Yeah. I was going to mention that was one of the first things I really latched onto when I started understanding this stuff, was saying poles and holes, that so much of symbolism goes back to poles and holes. And once it's kind of seeded into your mind that way, you notice it all over the place. It's totally true. Keys and locks, there's a bunch of different metaphors for it, but both, specifically the pole though represents that center. So even if you look at like the circumpunct, which is the symbol for the sun, right? It's the circle with the dot. To me, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of symbols that were once polar in nature and then they became solarized over time. I think the circumpunct is a good example of that. If you're looking at it from a 2D perspective, it's a circle with a dot, right? This is the Godhead and a bunch of other things. But if you look at it from a 3D perspective, you can imagine that center dot is actually a pole, so it's literally a pole within a hole. And when you look and study mandalas or different sort of meditative kind of like works of art, the Sri Yantra, things like that, it's all speaking to the same sort of sacred center, in my opinion.
Yes.
And I see these things as being like connected, these different centers, the center of the heavens, of earth, and actually of self too, which relates to the heart, which I know you guys have talked about Tor, in the Tor's field and the heart and Stantenin and things like that. All of these things are completely related to each other. But Dustin,
Absolutely. Well, real quick, I wanted to jump in
go ahead.
real quick with another. The fact that Atlantis is said to have been shaped like a concentric ring city, obviously that is exactly that same kind of symbolism, where that sacred center is there, it's uncanny. And then of course you have the idea of the magnetic mountain in the north having, that's again a sacred center as well. But anyway, Dustin, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, when we're talking about symbols, I don't think people realize how actual ancient, based on that wheel that you were showing earlier, Andy, it is showing that English, the characters we use are far different than the Phoenician characters. And it's more likely that the Phoenician characters are a degeneration of these characters.
Yes, that's also what I think.
And it's, you can know that because they say the opposite, that it evolved into this, but why are they the way they are? And why did this illiterate man who couldn't do any math come out with this story in 40 years ago, Eeyore Bock, and come out with this story, and a genius guy who studies gematria and Jewish Kabbalah and everything, redesigned all the characters to their precise locations using the angles of the moon and the sun on a upright axis to the North Star.
That's a pretty big bomb.
And how is that possible that these languages, the root language, the Finnish language, and then which both constructed the English language, how is it possible that our languages are describing in great detail with every word this time before ice existed on the planet? All our words with ice are referring to it in a very specific way. We got nice, no ice, nice, right? You got isolation, right? And you know, you get all these ice words, and they're generated later. You can hear it in the word itself that it was generated later, you know. And anyway, I just wanted to say that, and also in this alphabet wheel, that again, Eeyore Bock never went to school. All he was given by his, you know, family was this story, and that was his only, you know, this is the reason you were born. And he like wasn't actually the one who was supposed to give out the saga, but someone died along the way, and you know, things had to happen in a little weird way. But again, people are attacking the man, not the saga. Again, he's illiterate, comes up with this alphabet wheel and this rhyme explaining that LMNOPQ, logic of the moon and the North Pole and the universe, or Udin, the ring, the sun. P for pole, and so the ring and the pole give you quadrat, which is the sundial, which is the shadow. The letter Q is the shadow cast from the sundial in the middle of the ring, which would have been Udinma, right in this galactic axis. And the only ones in the whole planet could have experienced this by looking at it, looking at a tree and the shadow it casts, or from this area in Finland to today, during this time that supposedly hasn't existed for 50 million years. When did the earth tilt? I don't know, but their whole language and all of our words are describing this time. I don't know.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no, I'd like to give a little bit of validity to this, because I think a lot of people get kind of hung up, as I did, on did Eeyore make it all up? And I think that's a fair fair thought to have, and a fair investigation to undergo when you first get into this subject of the Bock Saga. You definitely need to look at that. But if you look at the saga efficiently enough for not that long, you will find out that one, even like a savant could not have come up with this, but also that after he died, we as a, you know, a loose knit community of interested parties have discovered thousands of more examples throughout history and throughout mythology and symbolism all over the planet that reflect back on this root language and the story being told that Eeyore never mentioned or had any clue about. And when you talk to his friends and you watch the fucking 6, 7, 8 hour VHS tape videos of all of them sitting around doing what they like to call their blah blahs, their long talks, it's all of them working things out together. You know, it was Eeyore telling them what he was told slowly but surely, but he had to work it out as well. I mean, can you imagine being that person who has a mother and an aunt telling you this story from the age of 7 upwards, you know?
And you know what's interesting also is a lot of he first told the story in
Goa.
India.
Yeah, Goa.
And he's really broken down all of the words in Hindu to be these root words with a very specific meaning that still kind of hold the similar meaning to this day. Yeah. And it just on something that Mario was saying earlier of, you know, we have all these mythologies, symbols talking about the North, right? So I don't know if anyone ever bothered to ask the people that they're talking about who live there today what they think. And you know, and this is where like the Bock Saga comes out of. And now I see a lot of people like to take the Bock Saga and go, okay, we got the Bock Saga over here, we got Hindu mythology over here, we got Quetzalcoatl and ancient America history over here. We have all this. You're talking about ancient history and then one man's story and holding it up. And you know, it's like it's and he's there in this Bock Saga, it's very plain, straightforward, human, like okay, that actually, I mean, that actually makes sense, that that could be the case, you know, kind of thing. And then what the Bock Saga talks about and isn't speaking for is the concept of Udin, right? It talks about Udin in many ways and is invoking this idea of Udin being everything, being always been, always will be, a ring, and you know, and so there's this talking about of the solar, right, and the lunar, but for themselves, they speak for themselves, right? Whereas everyone else seems to be symbolically talking about these Oser at the North Pole. And I just think that's an interesting distinction to be making, because you know, especially if we're getting everything from the last 6,000-7,000 years. I mean, the Bock Saga basically ends 6,000 years ago. I mean, like not really. I mean, more like 1,000 years ago. But what I'm saying is, like, books started. You know, so the narrative machine really began 6,000 years ago.
Around
and where
Sumer.
There's these things breaking apart, and you know, writing being developed, and now we're talking about, you know, is up just mean north?
Right, heaven. Well,
right?
So that is the idea from. I'm sure Mario could speak to this as well. And I think you already mentioned it briefly, that this idea of heaven or Eden being the North Pole. This is obviously something that we have in the saga. It's very clear without saying it that it's heaven. And it's, oddly enough, it's also hell, you know. And I think that is a wink, you know, it's some kind of wink, like, you know, I don't know. It's the inversions are all there, and the pro-pagan, the propaganda. It's all very interesting how it works out. But I'm just curious to hear more about your perspective on this idea, this heaven, this possible. Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, one of the books that kind of got me very interested in this side of the northern angle, and the name is you know, for some people controversial, but this book right here, Stairway to Heaven by Peter Levenda. So you know who Peter Levenda is, I'm sure, Andy,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And so some of his work, I mean, basically he literally opens up this whole entire book and he shows just an illustration of Ursa Major. Basically, it's the first thing you see when you crack it open. And this idea that literally so many different groups, cultures, had this idea that there is a stairway to heaven and it goes to the northern sky, right? And so that's mentioned in the Bock Saga. It's something along the lines of when you die, your soul grows wings and you go to the North Star, essentially, something along those lines, right? And so I'm like, this tracks with what he's saying here. And he goes through the different sort of ascension myths that fit with this. So, you know, like alchemical stuff and Kabbalistic stuff and everything else. You know, the middle pillar in the Kabbalistic tree of life, this is the world axis that we're talking about. Right. And so even the hidden Sephiroth Doth, they correspond with the north, you know, so it's all right there. And that central pillar extends above and below the other two side pillars. The two side pillars are solar, lunar, and then what's the middle pillar? It's polar, actually. Go ahead, Dustin.
Oh, when you said Doth, I just want to note, like, a lot of these old words that have TH, CH, SH sounds came much later. And so you can actually usually remove the H and get the actual sound out of it. And so if it's DOTH, you could just think of it as dot, but the pronunciation would be doot. So I don't know what that, I mean, you have like duty or something like that, but also dot, you know, we're talking about the mark in the middle, you know, anyway. So
yeah, no, exactly. You totally got it, man, for sure. Even that middle pillar, oftentimes I think there's a lot of polar symbolism in Freemasonic tracing boards and things like that. They acknowledge the pole for sure, you know, but I don't know at what degree this is kind of mentioned or brought up or whatever. But the circle with the dot in the middle, the circumpunct, oftentimes is associated with that middle pillar. And so it's really interesting too, just because I'm bringing it up real quick. There's so many Masonic tracing boards that have these three pillars as well: a solar pillar, a lunar pillar, and then I think a pillar that's basically polar. You know, it's the oldest pillar. And in some of these tracing boards, it's amazing to me that the middle pillar will sometimes literally be like a stairway to heaven sort of thing, or a Jacob's ladder. That's another symbol for the pole, in my opinion.
Yep.
Jacob's ladder will cross over that central pillar. Another thing that you'll see though is that the solar pillar is closest to the viewer. The lunar pillar is a little bit further back in the midground, and then the polar pillar is the one that's furthest away. And to me, this tracks what I'm learning is that we live in a solar age that was preceded by a lunar age, which was preceded by a polar or stellar age, basically. And this is in the tarot. So you have the star card. This is the polar tradition, in my opinion. I think the star in the star card literally is the North Star. It's not uncommon for this star to be surrounded by 7 other stars. These are like the 7 original stars of enlightenment. Ursa Major, Ursa Minor too, which connects to the North Star, also has 7 stars in total. So the number 7 is really very, very significant in polar symbolism. And then past the star card, right just after it, you have the moon card, and then you have the sun card. In the sun card, you have a child. You have a small child on a horse, or you have 2 children in front of a brick wall.
Would you say
This
it
to
was a
me is,
son?
yeah, the sun card, right? And so
Yeah,
to
I mean,
me,
is
it's
it
like
a
saying
son?
like this is
The
the
child, a
newest
boy?
age.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That too. Exactly. But to me, it's kind of saying that like this is the most recent age. This is the newest age. The oldest age, this is me personally. So this isn't Bock Saga related necessarily, but there's a very strong feminine component with the polar age. And I thought it was really interesting that you guys mentioned something along the lines of what Eeyore Bach, what he was able to learn was more of the masculine side, more of the yang, right? Versus what the women were learning. Is that my
As he
understanding?
as he said it is, they were teaching him this stuff when he was quite young, and so from the age of 7 to 27. And so when they were talking about their female stuff, he wasn't that interested. And
Mm.
so, but when they started talking about the man stuff, he's like, yeah, I want to learn everything about that. And so there's like maybe 100 or more different words for describing the man's lance in every, from when it's small to getting bigger, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, but so he learned all of that and retained all of that, but all the specifics of the female side he didn't retain so much. But there is a recording of him where he was speaking in front of a female audience, and they would ask questions, and so he kind of went over the female stuff together with them, and it was kind of interesting. I just wanted to ask you, so you call it the circumpunct, which makes sense phonetically, especially, you know, sir is smile, or I mean a circle, and like circumference or something, and then punctured in the middle. But is that the only name there is for that thing, or are you
Pe
aware of other names for that symbol?
Yeah, the circle dot is another name. And then it's also generically has been referred to as like the Godhead, and then also it's been referred to as the monad as well. So those are
Right.
the names or titles that I generally am aware of.
So
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, you know, as I was saying earlier, like how a lot of the symbols are talking about the north, and so in Bock Saga they have their own symbols, which would not be represented the same way in the other kingdoms around the world, let's say, right? And so when you said the Bock Saga says something, I've actually never heard it like that before, and so I just wanted to correct that. The spirit is in the breath, according to Bock Saga, and but there is that the bee leaf, you know, where you burn and bury the bodies, and their soul goes into the leaf, and this idea of it getting back into a man, you know, these souls coming back in and into the balls to our own Taurus field. I think a lot of the 10 tropical kingdoms mythology are more describing, you know, the spiritual aspect of the Taurus field, and whereas usually in like the Bock Saga it's more referring to the 8 powers, or you know, you got the grandfather, grandmother, the all father, the Yotsun, and then and anyway, so there's 8 total, and yeah, I think I lost my train of thought, but I wanted to ask about that circumpunct thing, if there's other names, because going into the words, if they're, of these symbols, is usually pretty enlightening when going back into the root language.
Yeah. No, absolutely. For sure, man. I would say even too, there's a relationship with the circumpunct with the compass, right? And so how you actually create a circle, right? The Masonic compass, right? Or just a drawing compass, you plant that pole and then you have a point of pivot to actually create the circle, right? And so there's a lot of Masonic stuff definitely out there regarding the circumpunct and all of that. But I just, yeah, go ahead.
I just remembered. So the in Bock Saga symbology, it makes me think of Midgard. So Midgard is described as hell, which is the hole on the top of the pole, the holy land, at the top of the E, which is the pole. And outside of that, inside the circle, is Asgard, or so the garden of the Aesir. And then you also get your words like guardian, or things like that. And then outside of that, I think of vanguard. So there's actually, a bigger, never-ending circle outside of that.
Excellent. I'm into it.
I was also thinking that this idea that the circle dot represents the Godhead, you've seen it on people's foreheads where the third eye supposedly is, It's interesting because we talk about Bock Saga as the root language being an anatomical language, and it being very intentionally called that, an anatomical language, because it's really, everything is being described from the body outwards, correct? So it's really interesting that this symbol can be interpreted as, or is being used as, something that represents that more spiritual, more anatomical, more we can all relate to it on our own bodies sort of symbolism, but it's also related to this very physical place, it's like as above, so below, which again is a concept that seems to be polar driven or northern driven, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I would even say, related to that, as it pertains to Hermeticism,
Yeah.
I would say Hermes, Thoth, mercurial type figures, they're polar deities. That's what they represent to me, in my opinion. So they're generally known as being psychopomps. So they go between realms. They go to the underworld and things like that. So they're a guide of souls, a conductor of souls. How they get there is actually through this world axis, the world axis that connects these realms together. And Dustin, you mentioned the Taurus field and toroidal symbolism, which is a major interest of mine as well, right? In my opinion, I don't know if you see it the same way, but I see it that we live in a large toroidal structure, essentially, and that the middle part of the Taurus field, the hyperbola, is the pole. That is the pole. That is the world pole. That is the world axis, or the axis mundi. And it's very interesting because in Egyptology, it's fascinating when you look at like their zodiac, right? Or you look at their astrology, right? The stars in the sky. Ursa Major is the thigh of a bull, right? This is a major correspondence. There's so many correspondences for Ursa Major. It's absolutely insane. Generally, though, it's a plow or a wagon, Odin's wain. It's been a number of things over the ages, but the thigh of the bull is what it was in ancient Egypt. And there's storylines that relate to this thigh of the bull. And I have a book by this woman named Judy K. King, and she was saying that the Egyptians had this northern stairway to heaven concept as well. That the soul...
there was an Aesir man.
Okay.
Yeah, Bock Saga claims takes claim for the first one of Egypt, the original dynasty, and even the references are the Bock beards that they all wear, even the women mummies. And he changed some things, but there was as after the melting of the ice age, there was a reconnection with all these different civilizations, and after quite a long time, they realized there was no one sustaining Africa, and so they wanted to create a place for Africa and to rebuild civilization. And oh man, what was I about to say though? I wanted to. I forgot. So, but anyway, yeah, and yeah, I had the Bock beard reference on, but
totally. So what I was just going to mention though is that what this woman said in her book, it's called the ISIS thesis, that their understanding was there was an opening in the north, in the northern sky, and they refer to this opening as the cusp of a bull's horn. And so you can almost look at it's almost like this funnel sort of idea kind of thing, but that the opening at the very top was related to the bull as well. So there's a lot of northern correspondence with bull symbolism as well, I found.
Yes, and I kind of remembered now. So well, also it's said to be that the Egypt, especially later Egypt, was more in the age of Taurus. And then also, so you get a lot more bull symbolism, you know, what is that, 6,000 years ago to 6,000 to 4,000 years ago. And then after that is the age of Aries, which was kind of the foundation of Judaism. And with blowing the ram's horn and putting the ram's blood on, you know, killing your first, I don't remember, I don't know all of it, but, or do not worship false idols, like a golden cow when the sun was in Taurus. Anyway, right. And now we're in the, then we finished the age of Pisces anyway, which is Christianity. But even the dimensions of the pyramid, you know, I think everyone, it's pretty well known that it's the dimensions of the equator.
Yeah.
And then the height of it of the pyramid is the like measuring from like the center of the earth to the North Pole.
Yeah,
so
it's
the pyramids are built. Yeah, like every Earth's rotation, every 1 second is the distance of two sides of the pyramid or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that I never hear brought up, and I came to this conclusion myself. I have since read other people who have mentioned the same thing, which I was really delighted to see. The pyramid is a world mountain. It's Mount Meru. It's the central mountain. It's the polar mountain. That's basically what it is. You know, not many people kind of discuss it in that light, but once you see that, it becomes kind of obvious that that's what's going on, you know?
Absolutely. I've heard that recently too, that, you know, it's such an obvious thing too, once you hear it. It's like, oh my God, of course, these symbols that are placed everywhere are representative of this basic form in nature that, and of course, this is where the gods come from. Right.
Yes.
And we can get into that, but we can kind of get into that by doing it this way. I was going to ask you, Mario, about some more detail about this blueprint idea you mentioned. What are some of the signs for you that the polar, age or symbols are more of a blueprint? I guess what I'm asking is, a recent situation has come up where, you know, we're seeing the Bock Saga getting looked at as if it's any other mythology, and it can just be thrown, like we can criticize it the same way or pick it apart the same way. I think we can pick things apart and ask a million questions about it, but to lump it in with all the other mythologies is a troubling thing, because basically the saga is describing how all the other ones were created. You know, whether it's true or not, you know, leave that open, but it's a very unique thing. So I'm very curious for you from your angle, because we're kind of talking about the same thing where it's a prototype or a blueprint. What are some
All
of
roads lead to hell.
Yeah, right. What are some of the signs for you, Mario, that the polar is a blueprint rather than, you know, just another belief in the mix? What do you think?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. And I'll say for me, the North Star, it answers a lot of questions in this regard. And I think what you have to consider, this is me personally, I think you guys are maybe in a different place, but I am someone, I tend to favor more, I don't know what the real cosmology is here. What's the real cosmography? In some ways, to be honest with you, I think the most accurate map of this realm that you can get is the circumpunct. I think anything else beyond that, you might be buying into something that isn't entirely accurate, you know. But the circle with the dot, I almost feel like that's the realm we live in, you know. And so a lot of you know, people have said that we live within within rings, spheres within spheres, whatever you want to say. I personally, you know, I don't see it that the sun is the center of everything. I have more of a geocentric cosmology. That's where I lean towards. I think that this place is center stage, and I think that partly people have a heliocentric model because of science fiction, because of a lot of the UFO type comic book stuff that people have kind of, you know, been consuming for a really long time. I see it that we moved from a geocentric sort of timeline or age to a heliocentric age, right? But to me, the North Star, right? All of the stars in the heavens revolve around the North Star, excluding the wandering stars, excluding the seven planets, right? Or however many planets you want to acknowledge. There's
Right.
nothing you can say or do to get around this fact. From the perspective of Earth, which I'm probably never going to leave this place. I think that this is kind of it. So
Yeah.
I'm trusting my own senses. I'm trusting my own experience about things here. So when I look in the sky, all of the constellations, including the signs of the zodiac, they all revolve around one star. It's a central star. When you start getting into North Star mythology, it's referred to as an imperishable star. It's an eternal star. It's a guiding star, right? All compasses point north, you know. And so to me, I even see the compass. It's funny that I brought up the compass as a polar sort of idea as well, but then you actually have the compass, right, that points you north.
Right.
You know, the compass to me is a physical and a metaphysical tool, you know, that when you look into the idea of the dot, the symbolism of the dot, everything expands from the dot and then also returns to the dot. Sounds very much like a torus field, in my opinion,
Dude,
because it's
yeah.
explaining the same sort of idea or same sort of concept. So to me, the North Star being this eternal star, and realizing that Ursa Major was the first or a primitive sky clock. And there's so much about this too. Like, I've read multiple books at this point about all of this stuff, but there is a northern system basically. And so the North Star is still something that you know, it's actually encoded in a lot of myths that, you know, people still kind of you know, will relay and kind of like keep some sort of like heritage alive with it. But if you didn't know its significance, you wouldn't realize how powerful of a circumpolar system we actually have up there. So this includes, right, Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and then also Draco too. So sometimes the primordial or northern tradition, I would say too, some people have referred to it as the Draconian age or the Draconian tradition, right? And so all of these things are completely related to each other. And so to me, the power of the pole star is that it brings you back to center, right? There's a reason why people refer to maybe their true path as their true north, right? There's a reason why it's been called the guiding star, essentially. So I see it that the North Star, that cosmology, the primordial tradition, it actually brings you more inward. And as we've become more solarized, that actually brings you more outside of self. And I think you need to have a healthy balance of both, you know. But
Yes.
in today's world, with the experts, you know, they want you to be outside of self for everything. And so, one of the things, just to piggyback off of this real quick, you know, I know that there's people who get triggered with the Bock Saga and the different rites and stuff that might involve genitalia and things like that. Um, it reminds me of the fact that in today's world, we're dealing with modernity here versus tradition. In today's world, they want us to think that we are dirty, right? That we're full of sin, right? That we're more mechanical, right?
But
My
you can be a
fiance,
little bit cleaner if you get circumcised. You could be this much
yeah, that's
cleaner.
right. Or get this booster or whatever it might be. Yeah, exactly. So my fiance, she's an herbalist, and she has also really gotten into tracking our medical system or the different ages of medicine, right? So the current age is referred to as the scientific tradition. The age previous to this was called the heroic tradition. And the oldest age, according to this well-known herbalist, is the wise woman tradition. But when you look at these different ages of medicine, it ends up being that essentially, the further back you go, people had an understanding that you have to address what's happening within, right? That you have to address your kind of emotional state, your spiritual state. So I'm sure you guys have probably gotten sick when you've been really stressed out, right? Or if you're
Yes.
really, really being run ragged, right? All sorts of different conflicts can kind of come up, right? And so we don't address the internal anymore. It's always external. So it's always this external solution and this and that because you're dirty and because you are full of sin and everything else. So to me, when I hear about these different rituals involving semen and things like that, I'm like, you're dealing with people who had an understanding that they were actually more divine and that they weren't dirty and they're not full of sin, and that what we have within us is precious and should be honored and revered and everything else. So I see this polar to solar switch as this internal thing, which is more polar, and then this external thing, which is more solar. And even it's very interesting because circumambulation is something that I've gotten interested in. A lot, it's not uncommon to have a sacred center and then you revolve around it, just like Mecca. They go around the Kaaba cube 7 times. Going clockwise is more expansive and it's more solar. Going counterclockwise is actually more polar and it actually draws you more inward. And this is kind of a metaphysical sort of thing that you can look into and learn more about. Go ahead.
Wow,
I was going to
that's
say,
awesome.
so in the saga, since we're kind of along the same vein, the center of the swastika is the North Star.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And the swastika has a very specific representation, right? And from the North Pole, you can draw a cross, right, from this on the planet, and it separates the globe into quadrants because everything is south from the north. There is no east
Absolutely.
and west until you start, going in a different direction. But at the north, you're only north and everything's south, right? And the swastika, when it goes in a certain direction, by the way, the word swastika is a root language word for sulfur stick or a sulfur swiveling stick. And and you can find it in all of the cultures around the planet. And you can also find them actually taking pieces of wood and shoving sulfur in them, and then they spin. And as it's spinning, just like looking at tire rims on the freeway, it starts looking like it's swiveling the other direction.
Yeah, it does that optical illusion.
And it's symbolic of the All-Father in hell or at the North Pole, making all of the next class or caste of men that will reside in the stan in the center of each ring land. And in each ring land, this raw bee, you think like a bee in its honeycomb or something like that, and he's making the next class under them, and et cetera, et cetera. And this military system, this meal eater system, is coming back up. And the counterclockwise swastikas represent the offering system coming back up. And the swastika clockwise is representing the people coming down. And, and so it's this, and it's through this offering system that this All-Father has the let's just say, the energy or the stamina to continue to make these 200 plus kids a year for 50 years. It's a very tasking job. And so his only role, his only title is to make all of that. And that's what the swastika is representing. As you bring it back up, you bring the soul power back up, and then it comes back down, and it's this cycle. And, like you were saying, just same thing. Like if you imagine the South Pole, hurricanes go in the opposite direction in the South Pole. You have, whereas hurricanes go in spin, in the certain direction in the northern hemisphere. And this torus field is this concept of going in and then back out and around. But a torus is actually a 4-dimensional object. and people don't realize this, that it's actually more like a donut, right? And it's more of like this donut, but that it's only donut shape when you account for all time, right? So it's, you know, like when you've seen those, like someone like move like this pendulum and they put like a marker in the bottom and it starts making these cool designs, and it makes these patterns, you know, like it looks like the flower of life or whatever. It's slowly constructing the torus field, this 4-dimensional object, right? Anyway, so just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, dude. I'm into it.
And that's I'm sorry, that's kind of what the North Star in the saga, the souls or the spirits, or when we die, it doesn't go to the North Star, it goes back into the Allfather himself. So that's where you get your word breed and breathe, because he breathes in the Andes. This is where we get the word Indians, or the Andes Mountains, the Andes Mountains. This is the same word for spirit is the same word for breath in both Finnish and root language. And so he breathes in and breathes out.
Excellent. I love it. I have to bring this up right now. The swastika, yeah. The swastika, in my opinion, that's a whole conversation to be had too. It was intentionally, in my opinion, essentially smeared, and there was a campaign against it and all sorts of other stuff. But because of its northern roots, this book right here, there we go. The King of the World by Rene Guénon. It's sometimes referred to as the Lord of the World. I just finished it like last week, and he blew my mind once again. It's the second book that I've read by him. His northern understanding is fantastic. And essentially what he says is that the original blueprint or model for all lords and all kings goes back to a polar kingdom. It goes back to a polar paradise, a polar king. And so when you're saying that the toroidal field, you know, that he breathes in this energy or reabsorbs this energy, it's because the king symbolically exists in the middle of that cross that would be at the north, right? So he occupies that sacred center. And then this other book that I read, I may have talked about it last time a couple years ago, but At the Center of the World by John Michel, it's pretty interesting because he talks about all of these different traditions where the king divides his kingdom into 4 parts, right? And so generally there's a northern road, north-south road, east-west road. And so then you have these 4 quarters. And then in the middle, you have the 4 corners. How many times have we talked about, or people talked about, the 4 corners of Earth?
Where they all meet.
Exactly.
Right.
I always thought that it was the external corners, right? But it's
That's what
actually
we're made
right
to
in the middle.
think.
Yes,
All the way to the
exactly.
corners of the 4 corners of the earth. You know, it's the furthest thing away from us, and that's what they want us to feel like and believe.
100%.
yeah.
And in the middle
You know-
of the 4 corners, there's usually a world tree, a standing stone, a temple, a mound, something along these lines that represents that sacred center. And then from there, this is where they congregate, you know, to be drawn and quartered has a relationship with these 4 quarters, you know, of your kingdom. And so this is the sort of ascension point. It's almost like the Z axis as well, I would say, you know,
So-
X and Y and then Z. This is the point of transcendence. Go ahead.
So I was talking about the letter Q earlier, and it stands for quadrat. And every
Ooh,
time I
yeah.
heard that, I was like, man, I'm thinking square or quadratic formula. It has nothing to do with that, but like, you know, I'm and it just translates into English as mathematics. And I'm
Right,
like,
yeah.
I'm trying to like bridge that gap, but this whole thing about the 4 quadrants, quadrat. I don't know that gave
No,
me a good color there. That was good.
That definitely
like
fits
that.
for sure.
Absolutely.
And the Q is a very feminine symbol, and it was, according to Saga, it is the women who did the math. So your mathematics is ma te ma. So you got mamas and tea is supposed to be the super fuel for the brain. And and you know, those whole stories about how to choose the right tea, and even to this day, the different plants and nature in Scandinavia have specific names that are actually describing using the root translations of what they are good for. And
yeah,
what kind
that's
of
crazy.
yeah,
That shit's
and,
wild.
you know, and these are the women that were killed in the witch hunts of Europe.
Right. Oh yeah. Q
During
for
that
queen.
time, I think the number is
Ooh,
around
yeah.
9 million. 9
Yeah,
million
about 9
witches
million.
burned.
Yeah.
Which is insane, right? Like, think about, like, no wonder we don't know anything about what the Bock Saga is talking about. We're like, what are you
Dude,
talking
I
about?
don't
They were killed off 1,000 years ago.
I don't know if I could pull it up right now, and I would totally butcher it if I tried, but definitely people need to look up and you can find excerpts from his books all over the internet, but Nicholas de Vere, his work on the dragon legacy, the dragon seed, he breaks down the word witch, and he goes all the way back to like early polar. No, granted, he doesn't go back to root language, but he does go back to at least what became the later words, you know. And I still appreciate these later languages, even if they're part of the confusion of tongues or some whatever the fuck happened after the third Ragnarok. I think in the, you know, or maybe before then. No, it was probably way before then. I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. It's gone.
Oh,
But
it's all good.
there was another thing I wanted to bring up though, and I'm curious
Well,
what you guys.
witch in root language is hexa. Hexa,
Okay, yeah, and that's interesting
which is
because
standing
that
for the
is
6 sisters. The
that
hex.
is something about Hexa that Nicholas de Vere brought up within that too. That brings back a memory. I just can't, I tried to find it real quick, and I'm not going to bore us right now, but yeah, definitely look into that. It ties right back to the polar symbolism. But yeah, I was
Hey.
curious. What's up?
Oh, I wanted to ask Mario a question, but
Go
but
for
I'll
it. Yeah,
talk.
no, it's all right. Go for it. Yeah.
So Eeyore Bock, before he talked about the saga, he was a tour guide, and he basically, well, first he was like a light technician, and you know, he would then he started doing like yoga shows where he would do his sauna knot kind of yoga around candlelight and things like that, and then they banned fire in buildings or something, and so he got a job as a tour guide. And what he was touring was the area around Helsinki, and he was giving tours of the 7 islands, and in English and Swedish. And some of his regular customers were, his regular customers were royals such as the King and Queen of Sweden, and many members of other royal families, and celebrities from around the world. And even up until the day he died, he was also working as a freelance tour guide of the 7 islands. And I was wondering, have you had anything come up with about 7 islands in your research?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 7 islands, 7 hills, I think is an appropriate correspondence. And so there's a lot of like holy sites where they are kind of indicated as such based on their proximity to these 7 hills. So if I'm not mistaken, there's 7 hills in Rome as well, right?
Yes.
And so there's 7. The number 7, the
and
septenary.
in Missouri, or like, you know, just above Florida or something. Yeah,
Totally.
there's a whole bunch of them.
You know, my bias is that I think a lot of this goes back to the 7 stars of Ursa Major and the 7 stars of Ursa Minor, and that there was this original correspondence of seeing these stars. And by the way, these stars were used for so many different purposes. There are some indigenous peoples where they could look at Ursa Major in the sky, and because they were so attentive to its location, that they can literally tell you what time of night it was. And I've read that within like several minutes, like within like 2 or 3 minutes or something ridiculous like that. You know, it was also used as a way to measure your eyesight. What stars can you see? You cover one eye and you look at Ursa Major and Minor, and they could tell what stars you can see, how well your vision was.
Oh,
And
wow.
so yeah, absolutely. And so there's a lot of different things kind of going on there. I've heard it referred to as the original 7 stars of enlightenment. You know, it's really interesting to me that we have 7 chakras, 7 colors, seven tones, musical scales, 7 days of the week, you know, things like that. It kind of goes on and on and on once you start looking into it. But one thing I'll say that's really kind of blew my mind last year, the 7th sign of the zodiac, which is Libra, It's the scales, right? I did a whole presentation, if people are interested, called the axis of Libra, and I put forward information that that is actually the polar sign. It's one of the most obvious polar signs in the zodiac, and it works just like the Masonic or the Kabbalistic pillars, in that the two pans, lunar, solar, but that middle axis predates these two pans. That middle axis, that vertical pole, needs to be there in order for the system to kind of even function. And I'm seeing a lot of polar wisdom in esoteric Islam as well, and in Sufism and things like that. It's really, really crazy. But one of my resources essentially said that in some sects of esoteric Islam, that Libra was considered to be the polar sign as well. That literally it was a pole. And you know how it works. A lot of these constellations, we have our modern interpretation of it, so we see it as the scales. But at one point, it was viewed as a potter's wheel. We're talking about axial symbolism. So axial symbolism is always something that revolves around the point of pivot, just like a wheel, right? It was also viewed as a tower at one point, the Tower of Babel. That's kind of a correspondence to the Arctic origin and then kind of spread as well, that there was this tower that is basically a polar symbol that people were unified to create so that they can actually bridge the gap between heaven and earth. Obviously, their plan was thwarted, and then after that, everyone had a different language and they had to scatter the earth. That tower represents the central pole, in my opinion.
You cover a lot of territory really quick. Because I wanted to say that so again, who named the stars, right? And this is kind of what I was hinting at earlier, is I'm working on, in my mind, on the concept of who named the stars, and we already call it astrology, and which is a very direct, straightforward root breakdown of that word, and astrology. And there is a day in, I think, December, this takes place, where it's called Lucia Day, and it is said in the Bock Saga that girls would have, when they are when their body is ready to have when they're ready to have a baby, they would have a dream, and if they wanted to become a mother, there was a certain dream of Lucia, of the goddess holding the 7 candles, which is I think and walking down a hill, and if she had this dream, it means she's ready to have a child. And then a few days later after that, there is some kind of festival, or I think this one would be like a carnival. Where, vol means to elect, and it is where the woman would choose the man that this in the coming year, in the coming cycle, is the man that she would make a baby with, conceive a baby with, in Gemini. And I think it's May 25th, and I believe that's Gemini, right? That's in Gemini, somewhere in there. But
I think so, yeah.
Gemini represents, I'm a little hazy on the astrotheology of Gemini, but it's something about twins, brothers, sisters, or lovers, right?
Correct.
All
yeah,
of the
yeah,
above.
yeah, definitely.
All of the above. And it would be in 9 months after that is Aries, right? And in Aries, their word, the root word for springtime, you wouldn't believe it, is vor, like war.
VAR.
V-A with the ring above it, R, vor.
Ah.
And that A, and so it is there, they don't have the W. So most of our W words in English are actually just V words in root language, and or in Vaughn language. But like Vaughn is actually one.
Yes.
It means one instead of Vaughn.
The one language, the one people. Yeah.
Yeah, but the A sound is like an ah, so one. Anyway, and yeah, so that's this, and then they would have 7 daughters. So it's always 7 daughters. With the Aesir, they would make 12 sons and 7 daughters. And this was during paradise with the upright tilt. But during ice time, the Atlantis time, they would make 7 boys also, because they didn't need to make as many people. So it went from a 7 and 7 to a 7 and 7 family structure.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. It reminds me of Atlas, and he holds up the world. Him holding up the world, that's more of a modern thing. He actually used to hold up the firmament. So he's actually more of a polar symbol, and that he had 7 daughters as well. Right. And actually, it's very interesting. This is another thing that I've tracked. And I've talked to people from all over that have different cosmologies and cosmographies and stuff like that about this. But there was a shift in the polar age. The 7 stars of enlightenment were Ursa Major. As things got solarized, the new 7 stars under a more solar sort of paradigm became the Pleiades. And so there's a lot of mythology that overlaps between Ursa Major and the Pleiades. And I've read it enough times now where I'm kind of convinced that that's actually totally the case.
Dude, yeah, I gotta jump in here real quick with it, because I wanted to bring up the Pleiades, and this is a little obscure, but the Pleiades is like the most popular set of stars to base all of your ancient alien criteria on. And it's interesting that this is the movement away from the polar symbolism, because that is what we see everywhere, a movement away from this polar symbolism over and over and over again in every way fashionable. And of course, my angle is often very fiery and pissed off at ancient alien hypothesis and people that just blindly plant their flag there because I personally feel it's the upgraded version of their faith, their religions. They're allowing themselves to be taken for a fucking ride, in my opinion, but it's covering up human history for sure. Yeah.
But
go ahead.
I was just going to say that they, the story of naming the stars is also in the saga, and it has to do with remembering, and where you store your E, right? And this is the North Star is the N, and it is knowledge. In English, it would just be knowledge. In roots, North Starna, right? And our word knowledge starts with a K, but it's not supposed to. It's supposed to start with an N. That's the sound, according to the sound.
Right.
And say, when the grandfather would die, you would name a star after them. Right. And now for generations, be like, oh, that is, your grandfather's star. And you can tell all of the stories associated with them. Because, right, isn't that one of the things that people say is everyone dies? There's actually 2 deaths. First time is when you die, and the second time is when the last person mentions your name.
Oh, yeah, I like that. Yeah. And it's also interesting that now in modern day, we point up and we say, oh, well, they're up in the sky in heaven. They're all up there.
And this is the method that Bock Saga uses to never forget the Allfather, even though he only has, let's say a 70-year lifespan, but his 12th son also becomes the next Allfather. So it's a title. And so now you can have kings that live in perpetuity, or for millions of years or thousands of years or eons and things like that, because it's a title representing, a duty, where this is like one of the great inversions. All of us peons in the world today have so much responsibility of taking care of the family and the house and our job and making an income and surviving and all this kind of stuff. But all the responsibility in the past was on the king. Yeah. All of the responsibility was to these hexa, right? These are the people plotting and making sure the next generation and had all the time in the world to figure things out. We can build magnificent pyramids or things like that because everyone's working towards a common goal, and there is this kind of unity. So that's one of the things that Bock Saga gets talked about. You really believe there's no violence and war and everything? It's like literally the root language, the Von language, don't have words for these things.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
I mean, and I think unfortunately, when people hear you say that, they go, well, yeah, that's the root language. Who says that's real? And I think that's that's a foggy area of the saga where, like, we have tons of people speaking this language in Finland and even Russia, and it's a real language. So I don't know where the discrepancy is. I know there's details in there that, I don't know. It's weird. I don't know.
Well, it goes back. It's like, what's Aries? He's the god of war. And I just
Right.
explained
Var.
war is
Right.
their
Yeah.
word for springtime.
Right. And it makes sense
And what is the
because he
first
ends.
day of Aries? It's the spring solstice. It's like
Right.
literally telling you in the word that it's the god of springtime. And this is the exact time of year that, since there are seasons, to have babies, the first appropriate time to have babies, because you don't want to have a baby in the middle of winter. So
Right.
everything has to be
Exactly.
very ritualistic, planned out, and you
Right.
need to make strong, beautiful, healthy children. Maybe beautiful could be last, but at least strong and healthy children to survive these harsh conditions. And now you go out and you're reconnecting with all the rest of it, and you've acquired all of this knowledge. You're right under the North Star, your whole existence, and all this knowledge is encoded in your language. You're speaking all of this knowledge in every word, and it's not like this hidden occult stuff. And so when you're taking these symbols, you're trying to take all this knowledge and you're trying to give it to someone else and share it with someone else, and reconnect. And so what's the best way to give these stories is in the zodiac, right? Well, look, I have these seeds. We made these seeds that you grow, when the sun rises in Taurus. I mean, if you ever look at the actual constellations, they don't look anything like, they just look like connect the dots of like a 2-year-old connecting dots, right? But the word horoscope is hair scope. So they would take hairs on like a crystal ball and start connecting the dots. And this is how they created the constellations and these great archetypes of when to make people, right? And who the Allfather is. You got Capricorn, that's the goat, that's the Bock, right? And then you have Aquarius, who's the water bringer, who's the story of this boy who would bring the ambrosia up to Zeus, and he spilled the ambrosia, flooded the world, right? And you have this story, right? But in ambrosia is a very specific root word also, which is with this reverse swastika idea of this offering system, that all of this, let's say, life water becomes so concentrated it's amber colored. Okay. And so so now, and then you have the women's milk. So you're in the land of milk and honey, right? And it's coming down. And what is the Pisces? It could easily, I don't know, as I see it, would be like what is the ambrosia made out of? Is our little swimmers, our souls, and it's completing the wheel, right? And Christmas Day on Capricorn, you have they call it in Scandinavia Yule Day, Yule Day, right? And it's in Capricorn, right? And we have this idea of this Baphomet being the goat, right? But Yule Day means wheel, and then devil is the
The
wheel,
wheel. Yeah.
the wheel, right? Our W's go back to V's again. So now we got the wheel being completed on Yule Day. It's saying that this happens on the third day of Capricorn, right? And anyway, and this is the story I see, and even the arctical animal of the sheep. It's very close, to. But why would you need sheep's wool if you're living in the tropics?
Right.
You have no use for rams and sheep. Okay, they're used for a specific purpose. This is when you shear the sheeps, yeah, and you're shearing the sheeps, and so you're giving people these animals. This is how you use them, right? And then you put the plow on the cow when the sun rises in Taurus, and you plant your seeds, right? And today, to this day, the month names in Finland, the Finnish names of their months are describing exactly this. They have like harvest month, I don't have the words.
It's
in
more
front of me
literal.
right now.
It's more direct. Yeah.
Right.
So-
but this explains some of it, but it doesn't explain until you get to Gemini, unless you incorporate these children making rituals. Because if we're talking about surviving wintertime, we're surviving the inferno, the infierno, which is hell in Latin languages, right? You're trying to survive the infierno, which is their word for hell is invierno, right?
Yeah, well, that's winter,
so
right?
you're trying to survive winter. So if you don't harvest the crops, the women don't go out, the women that don't make children aren't busy childbearing, they go out and harvest the crops you planted in Taurus, right? And you
Right.
weigh your crops in Libra so you can make bread, so you have food throughout the winter time, right? And you got to make sure you're planting your trees. And also what they would do in Aries is they would the name of the month is called burning month. This is when you go through and burn the forest and you create new growth and create this ash layer and heal the land and grow the topsoil up. And you go all the way into Scorpio. And now we're starting to get a little more metaphorical of the story of the sun as it moves throughout the year. You know, where the scorpion tail is hitting the sun and poisoning it, giving it its poisonous kiss, its betrayal of the sun after it has been judged in Libra, right? And we were going through the year, and the final shot, with the cane in the heart, the final kill shot of Sagittarius, and you're riding the horse vessel into the underworld. And then on December 21st, the sun reaches its lowest point in the sky and is born again on Yule Day as it starts its ascent again. And it's telling the story, but in there, it's a lot of it's that, but it's also the children making thing, which is the only place I've ever heard of anything like that is in the Bock Saga.
Right, yeah. And
Right, dude.
all
Yeah,
these
I mean-
things. Oh, sorry, just the
Sorry,
polar.
rant over.
No, go for it.
Just it feels like it's polar symbolism, and when you think about where all this polar symbolism ends up, like in Western religions, it's like, well, you would have no basis for this being in the Middle East. Like it's a polar story. It's much like I wanted to bring up the. Have either of you ever heard of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, the guy that wrote Arctic Home in the Vedas? And he wrote it
I
back
actually
in
have
like 1896 or some shit like that. It was a long time ago. It's a very old book. And yeah, talking about how this Vedic society was coming from the pole as well, because their stories wouldn't make any sense if they were just from somewhere near the Indus Valley. But I'm just curious. Yeah,
Exactly, right. I got to get into that at some point. I purchased it probably like a year and a half ago or something like that. But
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But when you go further east, the polar symbolism to me becomes way more apparent. The flag of India, it's a wheel. The wheel is a polar symbol. You know what I mean? I've been to India. You see swastikas, all over the place. So I see it actually. I'd like to know, does the term Aryan just mean northern origin? Is that how you guys kind of track it, or do you guys have another sort of idea? Because I see that a lot of words that are or are northern, Arctic as an example, right? Ursa and things like that. So R and being kind of like there's an original sort of essence to a lot of those words I found.
Sumerian.
Which is actually Shumarian.
Summer Aryan.
And this is that flag you're talking about, the Indian flag right here with that perfect polar symbolism. That's unreal.
Yeah.
And that does go back to the Vedic period.
Yeah. And you know who has the most simple flag in the whole world?
Japan, right?
Finland.
Well,
actually, Japan has the circumpunct almost.
Right. Basically. But
Finland is just 2 colors and a cross. Yeah.
Very simple.
That's right.
Exactly.
But it's a very Christian cross. I'm wondering if it started out as more of a even
Christian cross,
4-sided cross. Well, you know what I mean. It's
do they own any symbol?
Yeah, really? I should not have said it like that, but you know what I mean. It's like it's this. So,
right.
I'm kind of picturing a zodiac cross when I'm thinking old polar symbolism. It would cut off like as a square here.
So this is actually if you rotate it, this is representing the belt. And blue is an interesting color because blue is the rarest and hardest to get color of the ancient world, and only the most royal of people would have blue.
Right.
And then
right.
yeah, of course, and then you get like type in
So this is
Freemason.
representing the belt of the Lemminkainen.
We got this. I mean, that's not a very good example. There you go. These colors, man.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not. It's all connected. There's the Freemasonry is clearly connected backwards. I mean, you have this symbol.
The Freemasons
right
also have an Osir origin as well.
Yeah, and then we could. Yeah, at some point it would be great to get you two on with Joke Hagstrom from Sweden. And of course, everyone's going to make fun of me for saying his name like that because I can't fucking say his name. So if we got you guys on with Jock, it would be awesome because he could talk at great length about that stuff too and kind of connect other points. But this was really
Excellent.
great, and I appreciate both of you for being here to do this. And I think we probably could go on and probably unpack more. So maybe we could do a part 2 at some point or a revisiting because
I'm into it.
I love what you continue to uncover about the polar symbolism,
Yeah,
Mario.
that's awesome.
Because it's just like I trust what you're finding, and it's really great work, and it kind of puts the saga into a little bit of perspective too. You know, it's like, wow, okay, it can be found in other ways. You know, I'm finding a lot from, you know, Europe and what became in Europe, you know, European folklore and mythology. And I think there's just so many different angles to kind of peeling back the fog in this.
Mm-hmm.
It's unreal. And it seems to be unraveling exponentially. And I hope that's the case. And it doesn't really feel too much like a setup. And it's weird because like this stuff doesn't get a lot of coverage, you know, polar symbolism and other than, I don't know, a lot of areas of history that you're not allowed to look at or talk about really. You know?
Right. You're totally right. I've been really pleasantly surprised. I mean, so many people now at this point have reached out and just added to my awareness of all of this stuff because it resonates with them. And they're like, hey, this makes a lot of sense. This is really interesting. Have you checked out this book or this article or whatever? And so I feel perpetually validated that this is an accurate thread of information that's worth pursuing. One of the last things I just want to bring up real quick, because you mentioned at some point tradition, and I just want to say that one of the things you will find when you start looking into the world axis, which is basically a vertical line, it looks like Isa, right? It looks like the letter I, all of these different things. One of the most important symbolic sort of threads that is meaningful to me is that the pole brings tradition. It brings stability. There's a foundational aspect to the pole because the pole is symbolically driven into the earth, right? Just like a tree. We're talking about the root language. We're talking about the root of civilization and culture and all of these different things. And so the pole brings these things. And that's what, yes, absolutely. And then that's what in the right light, what kings and lords, what they bring.
Dude, Festivus.
I was not expecting that.
The pole is the law, and it's Christmas time in this. Are you guys familiar with this?
I mean, I know the Happy Festivus, not everything else, but that's hilarious.
Okay, well, at some point, I need to go back and watch that episode because the speech that he gives about the damn pole is unreal. But yes, sorry for
interesting.
that.
No, that's fascinating. I want to learn more about that.
It's his version of Christmas, and of course, we know that like Seinfeld and family and George Costanza and all of them were Jewish too, and this absolutely connects to Judaism and the origins of it and all this stuff. But sorry, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, you're good, man. Well, just to add to this, by the way, the winter solstice corresponds with what? The North.
Yeah,
North
dude.
Pole, Santa, all of this other stuff, right? So that's how I track it personally. But the pole, you know, because of its relationship to the earth, it embeds so much information, but it gives you a point of pivot. It gives your culture something to revolve around, right? That's what these sacred centers represent. So I just wanted to bring that there's a heavy component related to tradition and stability and things like that. And also too, as it relates to phallic symbolism, you put a pole in the ground to claim land. When you're having sex with a woman, symbolically, you are claiming land.
Yes.
This is very powerful. This is really important stuff, that like you said, a lot of people don't want to talk about it. But anyways, I could go
it's
on
too
and
simple.
on.
A lot of times it's too simple to talk about. They're like, it can't be just that. Oh, it can't
Right.
just boil down. But that's the whole point, right? Everything has
Totally.
been exponential in our entire existence. So we come from simple terms and simple things. The idea of making or the idea of thousands of people being needed to make one person seems ridiculous. The obsession with life-giving waters seems, one, gross because of the church and nothing else. And it seems weird and bizarre. And why waste your time? Well, if
Wait
you're
till
not
they hear about baptism.
if you're not yeah, I don't like that part either, to be honest. But but it's hard to accept. And we're not going back there anyway. That was Paradise Time is the past, in my opinion. But anyway,
I just also the Finnish language, their word for ma is country, land, earth, ground, soil, mother, property, dirt, clay.
Yes. Check this out. Check
There you
this
go.
out, right?
Exactly
Check this
right.
out.
100%.
If you ask anybody where they are, who's from Helsinki, and you ask them where they are, if they're in southern Helsinki, they'll say they're in Uudenmaa, which is, of course, Bock Saga. It's what it was called in Origin Times and Paradise Time. But the thing is what people will say today when they tell you that is that, well, yeah, it just means new land. Okay, so now this is going to be a little bit of a stretch, maybe a little paranoid, but for the past 100 years, and I know, Mario, you've been watching the Rise of the Experts series, we talk a lot about that word new and how it's been embedded intentionally for fucking ever. Well, mainly like the last 100 or so years. The new democracy, the new nationalism, new socialism, new testament, new world order, all of it is there. And it's interesting that this origin place, this Uudenmaa, which used to mean a certain thing, now means new land. And of course, if we break down Ma, it's land, but Uden is that source, that sun, that Uden is a ring, Uden is everything. It is not Odin, but Uden. It's that life-giving force behind everything. And it's interesting that gets changed to fucking new. Maybe it's a stretch, but it's like,
I don't think so. No,
yeah.
This is it, man. There's a war against tradition
And nature.
And nature, exactly, and the things that stabilize us and ground us, and older traditions and the primordial world and things like that. It's like, this is the paradigm that we live in. So I don't think you're wrong at all.
And people don't want to accept the fact that part of that that confusion, that purposeful misleading, is all of their gods and all of their mythologies and stuff like that. I don't think saying this, and I've said this like a broken record on my podcast, but it doesn't take away from true spirituality and whatever's going on within us and consciousness and the connection we have from the individual to the all. It doesn't take away from that to remove the gods that we have been handed by the powers that be. So I think people need to let go of that defensiveness when this subject gets broached, because a lot of times it appeals to their inner emotions and they're like, no, I can't get rid of that, whether it's New Agers or Western religious people, East, whatever, because in my opinion, it's all kind of being sold to whatever group, in the way that group will receive it best, so the New Age and the Western religions are kind of just different cards to be played to different people. And I think it's all to cover this up and to take us away from not only our real spirituality within, to give it away to something without, out there, up there, also something you can't put fucking handcuffs on ever, or blame, or, or look into history and go, oh, it was you. It was all humans doing this shit, all this stuff. It's an absolute purposeful misleading. And it's a hard thing to give up across the board, because and I said this before, but I'll just wrap up here. We've been led to believe for so long that the world is mundane, that once we have an inkling that it's not, it's hard to close that door. Because, and I think that's part of what the controlled opposition aspect of the truth community is when it comes to these bigger esoteric topics, is keep them off of the inner and put them onto the outer, whether it's DMT entities or government sponsored disclosure, or, you know, it's all to take away from what is within. And, you know, once you get there, you realize there's no such thing as within or without. It's all unity. But they don't want you to get there. That's just my take. But
for sure. No, man, I'm into it. Well put.
I love you guys. I love both of you so much with all the work you're doing and the research you're putting into this great work that we're all trying to put a little piece into. And yeah, for my audience who may not have known about you before, Mario, please tell the people where to find you.
Yeah, for sure. So they can find all of my socials and things like that at symbolicstudies.com. So I'm on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, things like that.
Perfect. Nice and simple. And yeah, it's a worthwhile channel to check out, especially if you're into the topics that I talk about a lot. Mario's got a lot of great stuff that he covers over there. Dustin, tell us where we can find you.
Don't find me.
Don't find me. Okay,
leave me alone.
That's fair. Well, okay, you can find him on that Bock Saga X on Twitter.
Okay. Yes.
I dead named them.
Yes, and you know, follow these guys. And yeah, I am on Bock Saga X. I do have an account. I mostly try to focus on just reposting. I think videos worth watching, recordings worth watching related to the Bock Saga being told. And it goes back to this thing of, we're talking about something, because that's all we can do unless we're actually saying what the Bock Saga is and let it speak for itself. And even if it's all fake, it's the greatest story ever told. I don't know. Yeah.
And one last point.
Have you ever heard a story like that?
I will add that point on, is that we get into the nitty gritty, and, you know, shout out to Thomas Gorence of Paranoid American. He did make a good point where there, and Drew Misson, of course, of You're Missing the Point podcast, has also made this point that there is elements of Bock Saga that are woo-woo. And we can't, and of course, not from the perspective of the Bock Saga, it doesn't seem woo-woo, but of course, to a Christian, Jesus rising from the grave is also not woo-woo. It's what fucking happened, right? So I really do feel like it's important to be anthropologists about this, you know, without the degrees. Fuck the degrees. We don't need to all be Robert Sepper.
Yeah, I mean,
he eats at really nice restaurants in his videos, but still, we don't have to have the, you know, the credits, but we have to think like that. We have to, you know, okay, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Maybe they were thinking this way, and maybe some of it makes sense. Maybe whatever your what's the word? Whatever you're thinking about it, it's fine. But does it align with other things? Does it match up with these other areas of the world and other parts of history? Let go the idea that one eccentric tour guide in Finland made this up, because that is not a thing. That's just not true. So you have to deal with the thousands of people that know this story without Eeyore's telling the world in 1984. You have to deal with all the families that run all the inns in Europe and Scandinavia who have had that tradition and were basically told to, you know, you can be here, but stay silent and don't talk about your traditions and don't speak your old root language. But they all do, and there's thousands of them. So you have to deal with that if you're going to come at this angle of Eeyore made this up. So don't go down that path, but do follow that notion of, does this align with other parts of history? And does it match up to especially things that are never talked about, especially by the counterculture? So, yeah.
Or things that are demonized, right? Things that have been
well, the things, keep in mind, a lot of what's been demonized is now being, you know, victim toted, and like think about it, the old archaic pagan world has been demonized by the church, and now we are entering a world where the popular thought is the church is fuck the church, the old ways are obviously better, but I'm not saying these people are onto the Bock Saga. They're kind of being sold a fake paganism on Netflix and shit. But it's not really the demonization anymore. Well, some of it is, but it's more of like what's just not being talked about at all, because we already have our hidden history that's very popular on Bernays controlled Netflix with Hancock never mentioning Europe or Scandinavia ever.
Hancock did mention it once in one
okay.
sentence. I caught him with one sentence, and he dismissed the entire notion of even looking up there because of the ice. It's down to its bedrock already. So what are you going to find unless it's underwater? And which they did find a giant megalithic structure, 60 meters large in the Baltic Sea, you know, but
Baltic Sea anomaly,
yeah.
Okay, well, listen, we could go on, and we will probably have to do a part 2. It was, again, great having both of you here. Mario Garza of Symbolic Studies, Dustin Wilson, Bock Saga X. Go check these guys out, and we love you very much here at the Deep Share. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, that's hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay? I mean...